Hello, welcome to episode 2 of Voice Notes from Samio. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about how not making clear choices is keeping you stuck. I am excited for this episode. This is stuff that I have struggled with and that I have overcome, and it has made a real shift. So I'm going to be giving you that pep talk today that maybe you need, that I needed, and hopefully some of these things can help. So if you're feeling a little bit sensitive, maybe this isn't the one for you, but if you're not, and you want to hear the real talk, then keep on listening. I'm going to start by talking about the hidden costs of not making decisions, because I think when you put some of that into perspective, it really makes you think. And then we're going to move on to talk about some of the reasons why we struggle to make choices, because I think understanding the why really helps us to have that clarity and then make changes going forward. And then finally, I'm going to share how you can start making those choices and break free and finally make those decisions with confidence. So first of all, what does it mean to be stuck in indecision? So if you feel like you're stuck in a cycle, feeling trapped, overthinking, taking little to no action, then it could be because you're not making clear choices. So what are some of the costs of not making decisions? So number one, it leads to little or no action. When you don't make a clear choice, you're unable to move forward, and that's how you end up getting stuck in that cycle. I found a quote in my notes app. I do not know who said it, but I will read it out to you anyway. And it says, you can either commit to the same things or choose new ones. Just make sure you choose. And that I found quite profound, because even when you're not making a choice, it sort of emphasizes the fact that you're still making a choice. You're either committing to the same cycle you're in, you're either choosing that by not choosing the other option, or you're deciding to break free from that and make a new commitment. But you do have to make sure you choose, because in not choosing, you're ultimately still choosing. And really, it's a very frustrating place to be, and you really do end up feeling stuck. I'll give you an example. So for me, last year, I really fell off things with my fitness. I stopped going to the gym. I stopped running. I was barely even walking, and I felt absolutely horrible. As someone who loves fitness, loves working out, it literally, if I don't do it, I go a little bit crazy, okay? So I fully fell off, and I started toying with all these ideas. I was like, oh, maybe I should go back to the gym. But then I was like, oh, I could start doing yoga because that's a bit more easier to get back into. And then I was thinking, oh, I could run because I like running, but maybe I should walk first. And in all this indecision and all this thinking and all this complaining, because a lot of the time that's what I was doing, I was complaining. I got sick of hearing myself, to be honest. I was complaining and not making any clear choices. I was talking about it a lot though. And I just got stuck in this cycle, and I don't even want to say little action, I made no action. And so eventually towards the end of the year, I picked things back up again and I was feeling good. And this year, I really wanted to make a proper commitment to my fitness again, because I know it's something that enables me to thrive and be my best self, feel my best self, all of that stuff. And so I just committed. I was like, at the very least, I'm going to the gym 3 times a week. That was it. That was the commitment. I didn't really overthink what I'd be doing when I got there. I mean, I have made a plan. That's a whole other thing. But I just committed and I made that choice. And once I made that choice, that was it. I committed to that. I stopped being the person that moaned because they wanted to work out, but they weren't working out. That was my commitment. And the difference it made, the shift that it has made, has been great. Are some of these things sometimes easier said than done? Yes. But does making a clear choice make it easier to actually show up and do the thing that you've been saying you want to do? Absolutely. And this leads on to number 2, which is kind of like number 1. It creates a lack of progress, and you really start to remain and feel stagnant. A personal example of this is me with my content creation. I have spoken about this on previous videos and on my social media. I went through a long period, I'm going to say 2 years, of feeling absolutely lost. Bearing in mind, content creation is my full-time job, but I honestly got to the point where I did not know what I was doing because I wasn't making clear choices. about what I was doing. So I was just floating along, and no wonder I was feeling lost. And in that, I wasn't really making the progress that I wanted to make. This year, however, I've kind of had a lot of reflection and I've made clear choices, one of them being this podcast, and I'm committing to it now and I'm showing up. And I already feel so much more directional and so much more focused. And even in just my showing up with my content that I'm creating with this, I'm already feeling myself making the progress that I personally want to make, that's important to me. So I think having those clear choices set out is the easiest way to move forward and to actually make that progress you want to make. And the biggest thing, which I think is an add-on, I was going to say it was another point, but it's definitely just an add-on of the previous point, is it wastes so much time, you ruminating and thinking about which is the best decision to make. It's just such a time sap. And in that time, you could just be getting your head down and focusing on the thing. Like for me, going to the gym, rather than thinking about it, yeah, I could have been doing yoga, I could have been doing the gym, I could have been doing both, but I wasn't deciding either. And sometimes you just have to make a choice to just stop wasting the time in between. And this also leads perfectly onto the next point. It's almost like I planned it. And this point is you miss out on opportunities. I wrote a note here which says you don't know what is and isn't for you. Oh, this is a big one, okay? And I know this all too well. When you do not know what is for you, anything and everything can be for you, but that is not always the best, because often it leads you going down roads that aren't really necessary or aren't really right for your own life, your development, your mental well-being, whatever it is. And when we make the clear choices, it's easier to decipher what is for you and what is not. A perfect example of this would be, say you're starting a business and you know your business is focused on well-being and organic products, let's say. And so when opportunities arise to have meetings, be it with potential buyers, clients, or even just like industry events, you know you're only kind of going to go to the things that are in line with that. If, on the other hand, you know that you want to start a business, but you have no clue what this business is about, then you might find yourself going everywhere, meeting everyone, going to every type of event, and being swayed left, right, and center and not really knowing what direction you're going in. Don't be wrong. I think really early on, if you're just kind of getting your foot in a certain industry, or you're trying to like scope things out, it can be useful to, you know, pick up information from all different areas. But after a certain point, that actually starts to do you a disservice, and you kind of need to lock in to one area of focus. Obviously, that's very business specific, but this could be in all areas. And then also it can prevent you from missing out on the opportunities that are right for you, because once you know what you're focusing on, what you're about, what you want, you can put that radar out and those feelers out so other people know, oh, that person is perfect for XYZ because they've decided they're focusing on this. And this can go from everything from relationships to business. Example, in relationship, if you're in a situation where you're not necessarily happy, but you're not quite choosing to leave, you're just kind of bobbing along in a situationship, as the kids call it today. If you're in a situationship, you're blocking yourself off from the opportunity of meeting someone that you actually want to be with, that's going to commit. So I think that's a big one. It just kind of blurs that focus and you don't know what is for you and what isn't for you. And so you can end up in this kind of blurry mess of just taking everything on board, taking on every opinion, taking on every option. And honestly, it can become pretty overwhelming and just keep you stuck. And I need to stop saying how it moves on perfectly to the next one. But let's just say this is a nice segue. It leads to mental exhaustion, because when you're constantly weighing up your options without taking action, it is exhausting because you're going round and round in your head. I could do this, I could do that. Again, it's a bit like the point of having too many options in your head. Whereas once you focus on one, you're narrowing down. So all else is irrelevant. It's like, no, this is my focus. I've chosen this. I don't really need to think about X, Y, Z. well, maybe I don't need to think about X, Y. I just need to think about Z. That's a better example. And it also keeps you in this headspace of uncertainty. And even that in itself can be very mentally exhausting. It can lead to a lot of stress and anxiety, because our brains are looking for certainty all the time. Obviously, we can't guarantee everything is going to go right and everything's going to go perfect. But at least when we've made the decision, we've given our brains a little bit of a boost, a little bit of a dopamine of like, you know what, I've got something that I'm focusing on. That's the thing. And it eliminates that overwhelm of all those other decisions that comes with all those other options. And this next one, you might not like it, but it actually can have such a bad impact on others. If people rely on you and you're unsure, then how can they be sure? And especially in like a work or a business setting, then how can people even take you seriously, because you're always flitting from one thing to the next, or you're really not very good at making decisions. Not only that, but it can be very, very stressful for other people, because oftentimes you end up putting the decision making on them. And I'm not going to say I've never been guilty of that, because I definitely have. And even in the moment when I'm doing it, I'm thinking, oh, this isn't fair, because I know I don't like it when it's put on me, when someone is so indecisive that you have to do the decision making for them. And I've been that person before to other people as well. And it is unfair, because then it puts, again, that mental exhaustion on that person, because they're having to do the thinking for themselves and for you. And so I think even thinking about that impact on others, it really starts to make you think how much of an impact it's having on your life. And it's not as simple as just like, oh, I can't decide, so I'm stressed. It's like, well, no, you can't decide, so all the people around you are also stressed and having to hold that burden as well. And this ultimately leads to my next point, which is that it leads to a loss of confidence. When you constantly look outwards and seek the answers in other people, or you don't make clear choices yourself, you start to lose your own confidence, because you start to lose that trust with yourself, especially if you aren't in the habit of making choices at all. You start to think, can I even trust the choices that I do make? And this can go down to as little as making a choice of what to eat for a meal. Like, it gets that ridiculous, and it gets that serious, because when you can't even make those simple choices, then that's when it starts to become debilitating in your life, because in all areas you start to be afraid of making choices, which we will get onto shortly. And I am going to share some solutions. This isn't just me going off on one, and I'm having this kind of real talk right now because I have been in these situations, and the loss of self-confidence that can come with not making clear decisions can have such a detriment on your life that you don't really realize it. It's very insidious. You might think it's just one big decision, but before you know it, it can seep into so many areas, and even small decisions can become really hard. And so we kind of need to exercise that muscle and learn to trust ourselves. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. We will get to the solutions shortly. But before that, I want to share my last point on this. And one of the biggest hidden costs of not making choices is regret. And obviously this can come over time, because repeatedly not making choices, obviously it leads to the other things: not taking action, lack of progress, missing out on opportunities, just feeling mentally exhausted and like you've wasted time. And then that can really lead to regret. And that's when you start to think, what if I had just done the thing that I'd been toying with? What if I'd just taken the action 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago? And this right here, this is not about berating yourself, and this is not about, beating yourself up for past choices made or not made. I just wanted to add this one in here, because I just want this to be a reminder that regret really can be a big byproduct of all of this. Although I'm someone who tends to say I don't have regrets, because I really do think each part of your journey leads you to where you are, and it's never too late to change, and it's never too late to start again. However, I definitely have had many of those moments where I've thought to myself, what if I had just gone for it? And what I'm trying to do here, and with everything I'm sharing, is to really help put it into perspective of the long-term costs of this being in limbo. Because you might think making the decision is scary, but what's scarier is looking back in, years, months, weeks, whatever, time to come, and feeling like not making a choice has been the worst choice. Because like I said earlier, you're still choosing when you're not making that choice. And I think all of us, when we think about it, we don't want to live with regrets. And if you have ones in the past, let today be your clean slate. And then moving forward, you can take the steps to make changes so that then you don't look back and wish you'd done things that you didn't do and so forth. But anyway, I could waffle on about that for a long time, but I won't. We'll move on to the next section. So I'm going to be nice again now. Nice Samio is back. Not Samio who's having a go. No, I'm not having a go. I'm being real with Cho, okay? So why do we do these things? Like I say, myself included, I'm not immune. I think a big part of it can be fear of failure because we're afraid of making the wrong decisions and then failing from said decision. And with fear of failure in particular, it can oftentimes, I'm not saying all the times, but it can oftentimes be linked to childhood. So if you were criticized a lot, or maybe if you were unfairly punished or berated or scolded, whatever, for certain types of behavior, it can become cemented in our minds. And this doesn't even have to have been an ongoing thing. It can come from parental figures, be it teachers or parents or family members, or it can come from peers, but it could even be from like a one-time event that's just kind of stuck in our subconscious. And so we realize the discomfort of that and the feeling that we want to mitigate that at any cost. Like we want to avoid the feeling of being punished or berated or whatever it was. So we start to think a little bit tactically. And at first it can be making choices that you think are right, but then, I made that choice and it didn't have the right outcome, or this person at work didn't like that, or that stopped me from getting a partner when I chose that. And over time, it can eventually lead to the point of being so afraid to make any decision that you're making none at all. And it can link so far back. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I'm just very interested in these things. But it can be linked so far back that we don't even realize it's there and that it's in our psyche. And it ultimately is a mechanism to keep us safe. And I'm not saying that this is a case for everyone, but I think if this is something that you think could relate to you, I think a big part of it is really realizing that it's not your fault. You've just been in a position of trying to keep yourself safe for such a long time that you've kind of got in this cycle with it and you've not even realized oftentimes. But once you become aware of it, that is when you can start to make the changes. And it goes back to building that self-trust with yourself. Allow yourself to make messy choices. Actually, not messy choices. That can be interpreted the wrong way. Allow yourself to make choices that maybe aren't deemed as perfect or good. And what I mean by that, I don't mean anything that's going to harm anyone, or don't do anything illegal, don't hurt anyone, anything like that. But those things that maybe was a little bit naughty when you were younger, I don't know. Something a little bit silly, and allow yourself to do those things and remind yourself that it's okay. And again, making choices and realizing that sometimes failure can be a part of that and it's okay, and giving yourself that compassion and reassurance that it is okay to fail. Not every choice we make is going to come to this amazing outcome, but it's a bit like one of those graphs. You might start at the top. You choose one choice, but ultimately one choice will lead to the next and to the next and to the next and to the next. So you could think you're going in one direction and end up in another, but as long as you keep making the choices and building that trust with yourself that actually you can make decisions and it is okay, it will allow you to kind of move forward and stop you from feeling stuck, and also realize that failure isn't such a bad thing and that you are okay. So give younger you a hug if they need it. Another reason can be perfectionism. This is very tied to the last point. And I did a whole episode about perfectionism because if you know, you'll know that I am a recovering perfectionist. So I know a thing or two about that. But again, it's about taking that messy action and proving to yourself that it's okay. Not everything has to be perfect. And that goes for your decisions. There is no perfect decision, so just choose. Another reason that we don't make choices is overwhelm. There is so much information. There's so many ways to do things. We've got social media, we've got TV, we've got our actual peers in real life, work colleagues, and it can all be very all-consuming, especially when social media is a big one. Let's be real. Let's be real. Especially with social media, it's like the world is literally your oyster. I have seen career options, lifestyle options, relationship options that I didn't even know existed once upon a time, that I now know exist because of social media. Of course, there are many benefits to this. It's great because we can tap into things that are maybe so aligned with us that we once would have never been able to tap into. On the other hand, it can leave us feeling like, oh my gosh, there's so many choices. And it can also lead us to question our maybe quite safe or potentially seemingly, I'm using air quotation marks here, boring choices, because it feels like everyone else is doing so many amazing things and going here and building this business and getting married to this person and doing this and, all of these things. So the overwhelm can be a big one because, again, it goes back to feeling like we're making the wrong choice and also feeling like our choice isn't good enough. But I'm going to tap into this soon on the solutions, but I think that's when we really need to tap into what feels right for us. And my last reason for why we don't make clear choices is because we're waiting for clarity. And if we're overwhelmed by everything we're seeing online and taking all these opinions on from everyone else, the reality is you probably won't find it. And even without all of that external noise, often just waiting for clarity is a bit of a tricky one because it often won't just come like that. You kind of need to take the action and make the choice. So there we go. So I hope some of all of that helped really put things into perspective and make you realize how much of a hindrance not making clear choices is really having on your life. And now we're going to move on to the main bit, which is how to actually break free and start making choices with confidence. So number one is to realize that it's okay to mess up and, in fact, practice messing up. So I did touch on this in the last section, but you can give yourself that permission to mess up and have failures along the way, because as I mentioned, not every choice will lead to an amazing outcome. And I know that's what we're trying to avoid, right? That is the scary part of it. But always know that you can make more choices. It's not the final choice. Each choice will eventually lead to another choice and so forth. And so allowing yourself to mess up along the way is fine. You're never going to avoid failure and you're never going to avoid messing up, however much you try to perfect and preen and make the perfect choices. So you may as well just start taking the action and then you can learn from it and then make a new decision and, keep going. Number two is embrace imperfect action and just remember progress over perfection. And also, I think sometimes we really hold ourselves back with this one because we might actually know that we want to make a certain choice, but the reason we're not committing ourselves to it is because we don't think we can do it perfectly enough. Again, air quotation marks. And I touched on a lot of this in my previous podcast episode, but at the end of the day, you're never going to get to where you want to be if you don't allow yourself to be imperfect, because it's really going to hold you back. It's going to be very, very debilitating. And that imperfect action is actually what will enable you to learn and grow and move you along on your journey. So you just need to choose the thing and then do the thing and not worry about it being perfect all the time. This podcast is a perfect example. I decided that I was going to do a podcast, and for once I didn't overthink it, because often I will overthink things and then talk myself out of doing them. But with this example, I was just like, I'm just going to do it, and in not trying to perfect it, and I'm just taking the action, I'm learning as I go, it's actually been very, very helpful because it's allowed me to realize it's not going to be perfect right away. I'm allowed to learn as I go. And often when we see someone's end result and we get really wrapped up, you didn't see their day one. You didn't see where they started off. And the fact that they just made a choice to get to where they are is how they got to where they are. They wouldn't have got there if they didn't choose. So yeah, I'm rambling. My number 3 is to set a deadline. Now, this can be a tricky one because it depends what decision it is in life. And I think sometimes the deadline thing can be not always helpful, shall we say, but other times they can be really helpful. I think in a work sense, especially, they can be very helpful because we need to say to ourselves, okay, if you need to do some research before setting up a business, if you need to really, scope out the market, go to the different events, work out how you're going to get yourself off the ground or whatever, then I'd say, perfect, give yourself a deadline and be like, in 2 months' time, for example, I'm going to have it locked in. I will have decided what my business model is and I'm going to get going with it. And I think that can be really helpful because it can stop you from procrastinating and getting stuck in the planning stage of something. And so in certain areas, that can be really helpful. And this will segue into the next point. I'm sorry, I can't help it at this point. So number 4 is to give yourself a trial run and to live your life as if you've already made that decision. Obviously, this will not be able to apply to all areas because some decisions are more permanent than others, let's put it that way. But where it is appropriate, giving yourself that trial run and potentially the trial run before the deadline can really help you to sort of step into that energy of what it would be like to make that decision before you do. Now, this might seem like a strange one and tricky if it doesn't apply to your situation, but in certain areas, this can be a good way to start to embody that decision and start to feel into it and feel what it would be like. So say, for example, if you were thinking about having a career change and that might feel very abrupt, is there a way that you can tap into that in your spare time? It could even be outside of work, study in the new field or new area that you want to dabble in, and ultimately trial running that new identity that you'll have to step into if you choose the choice you're thinking of making. But I think trial running that experience first in a way that you can, that's not permanent before you make a decision, can be really helpful to embody it and really start to think about, what would this feel like? What would this mean for my life? And does it actually fit with what I want? Number 5 is to trust your instincts and to lean into what feels good for you and not what is good for other people. This is a big one because I think when we're struggling with making clear decisions, another big part of it can often be the projection from outside voices. This can be a big one when you've got family members and peers. And again, going back to just social media and what we're influenced by in society. And I think when there's a lot of noise, we need to take a step back and really go inwards and really think about what feels right for ourselves. This could end up being a whole journey in itself because you might need to strip back a lot and really tap back into your own values, because often our own voice can get shrouded by a lot of noise and it can get very, very confusing. But ultimately, you want to make sure you're making a decision out of what feels good to you and not what's good to someone else. So that might mean setting boundaries with people, especially if they are quite vocal on what their opinions are for your life. Usually it's because they want the best for you and maybe they've made mistakes or made decisions that they wish they'd chosen differently. And so they're trying to guide you, but ultimately they aren't you, and no one knows what's best for your life than you. And you might feel like you don't know at the moment, but that's just because you haven't tapped into yourself enough and you need to reconnect. So we need to dial down a little bit of that noise, but ultimately we need to know what's right for us. And I think in doing that, you're going to allow yourself the happiest, most fulfilled life. And it's not going to be a one size fits all. Your choices might look very different to someone else's, and that's absolutely okay, as long as you're doing the things that you do out of integrity and out of love for yourself and others and you're not harming anyone, then I ultimately say you do you. This next one is a biggie if you are an overthinker. And this is to focus on the key important things and not the whole picture of the decision. I think this is called something like the 80-20 rule. Don't hold me to that. But the premise is you're ultimately focusing on the key 20% rather than the overall 80%, because often it's 20% of the action that creates the overall outcome. And so oftentimes you're not making a clear decision because you're overwhelmed of all the moving parts that come with making that decision. I'll use my podcast as an example again. If I really started to think about all the steps I would need to take to create a podcast, I probably wouldn't have chosen to do it because I would have found it overwhelming. I would have overthought it. I would have thought, there's no way I can do that to the standard I want to do it. And it sounds stressful. I'll choose not to. But by just focusing on the basic bits, which was choose a podcast name, sit in front of my camera with a mic and record a podcast. And that is the simple side of it. And actually, that is the main thing I need to do to create a podcast, right? And the other moving parts, I didn't really need to think about until I got into the process. And actually, in doing that, it allowed me to just step up, take the action, not overthink it, not over perfect it. And here I am, I'm sat doing it. I didn't need to think, oh, I need to edit the podcast. Oh, I need to think about how to upload a podcast and watch a YouTube video, which I did, by the way, on how to put my podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you are listening to this there, please download because I've heard it's super helpful, and also leave me a 5-star rating and review if you are enjoying. Cheeky little plug there. And all these other steps that I needed to do to create the podcast that I'm creating now, that would have just been information overload. And actually, it's only the 20% of the main action that creates the outcome. So I think simplifying things a little bit when it comes to making your choices can be very, very helpful, because once you just think about the key main things that you need to do, it's actually a lot easier to choose that thing and then go ahead with it. Number 7, if you have a narrative in your head where when it comes to making a particular decision, the reason you're not making it is because you're going, oh, but what if I fail? What if it goes wrong? What if it's bad? What if I'm laughed at? The opposite to that would be, wow, what if it's amazing? What if it's actually really good? What if this is life-changing? What if this is just the thing I need in my life right now? And flipping those questions to something a bit more positive can be just the thing you need to get excited about it and really step into that decision and think of all the positive possibilities that could come. Of course, there's always going to be downsides to everything. There's always going to be some negatives, some bumps along the way, but we can't always focus on that, especially not when making the decision. If and when problems arise, you will step up and you will face the challenge. But at the end of the day, problems are going to come along regardless of what choices you make. So you may as well just choose choices that feel good to you and that align with your values and that make you feel good. And then when the challenges do arise, at least it will feel worth it because it's on the pursuit to something that you actually want. And my final point is to seek clarity, not perfection. And I know we've touched on perfectionism here, but my point with this is that clarity will set you free and perfectionism will hold you back. And I'm saying this from personal experience because after making clear choices, it has been so freeing. And the times when I've deliberated, when I've been trying to perfect and trying to make the right choice, the perfect choice, I've honestly felt so stuck. So by seeking that clarity, you're going to set yourself free. And to do this, you just need to focus on the next step, not the perfect path. And this can just relate to everything that we've talked about because, again, going back to that point on overwhelm and thinking of all the options, when you are thinking of every possible outcome and everything along the way, it's going to be really hard for you to move forward. It's going to be really hard for you to make that choice, but you just need to think about the next step. The other steps will come as you approach them. And, you go step by step. If you're thinking about the perfect path and thinking, okay, if I want to get here, then I'll plan and do this and do this. It doesn't really work because, again, You don't know what speed bumps you're going to hit along the way. Life loves to throw us a good old curveball. It loves to be like, you think it's going well? Haha, here you go. Have one of these. It's comical how life likes to play with us like that. So even if you try and plan and set out this perfect path, no doubt little curveballs will come along the way anyway. So you may as well just take it step by step as you go. And this will make it so much easier for you to just lock into a decision by realizing that you don't need all the answers right away. You will ultimately learn as you go. So those were my main tips on how to break free and start making choices with confidence. And I do have a few final thoughts. And I wanted to remind you that as long as you're not harming anyone, in reality, there are no wrong decisions. I think we get so caught up in what will be the right path and what will be the wrong path and where it will lead us in 10 years. But as I've mentioned, you can't really preempt too far ahead. Like, I do think it's a good idea to have a bit of a plan if there's something you really want to do. And if it helps you make a decision to set a goal or go for something career-wise or relationship or health, that's great. But don't let the fear of that path going wrong stop you from making a choice, because ultimately you don't know where each decision will actually lead you, and you will encounter good and bad along every journey. And I've just realized I've made a point in my notes here, and it was to do with there is no wrong decision as long as it's not harming anyone. I am not talking about relationships here. If maybe your decision that you're toying with is wanting to break up with someone because you're no longer happy in the relationship, and you're afraid of doing that because you don't want to hurt them, that's a very, very different example. And I think ultimately, if you are unhappy in that relationship, you're probably not showing up as the best you can for your partner at that point anyway. And so in the long run, in a scenario like that, it's going to be better for you both if you end it rather than carry it on and wasting both of your time. But that's a very specific example. I thought I'd just make that point because I don't think anyone should stay in a unhappy situation for fear of upsetting someone's feelings. That's very different than actually, abusing or harming someone. So I just wanted to add that little point in there. And another thing to remember is that you can always adjust course after deciding. A bit like I said before, you don't need to know every step along the way. And so you can adjust course once you have decided. Most decisions you make aren't permanent. So you do always have the option to ultimately change your mind. Like, you are allowed to do that. You don't have to be tied to a decision you made if it is no longer serving you. And for ones that maybe are a little bit more permanent or not as easy to change, there are always ways to adapt. So I think reminding yourself of that is really helpful, because remember, you can't move forward if you stay stuck. And my final point is that every major success starts with a decision, however big or small. So you have just got to decide. The ball is in your court, my friend. Go forth, make decisions, get a little messy along the way, learn, show up, do it again, repeat the cycle, and learn to trust yourself along the journey. That is all I have got for you today. If you've made it to the end of this episode, thank you so much. Comment a little blue heart if you made it to the end. I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it useful. I have thoroughly enjoyed chatting your ear off, but I will love you and leave you, and I'll speak to you next time.